She canceled my credit card at 8 in the morning. By 8 that night, she found out exactly who she had made that mistake with. My name is James Burnett. I am 67 years old. I want to tell you what happened at my son's Thanksgiving dinner, because I think a lot of men my age have been in some version of that room, sitting at the far end of the table, watching someone smile while they dismantle your life and call it help. I am not a complicated man. I worked with my hands for 30 years. I raised my son alone after my wife died. I wore the same gray flannel shirt to 3 different family dinners, and nobody said anything, because nobody thought I was worth dressing for. That was all right. I had other things to do. Randall's house sat in a quiet suburb outside Pittsburgh, one of those neighborhoods where every lawn is cut to the same length and every mailbox looks exactly alike. It had taken him 10 years of steady work to get there, and I was proud of him for it. That Thursday, the driveway was full. His in-laws' Buick, a cousin's pickup, a neighbor who had come for drinks and somehow stayed through dessert. Inside, the house smelled like turkey, store-bought pie, and someone's perfume trying too hard. Football was on in the other room. Children were running up and down the hallway. Ordinary Thanksgiving sounds. I arrived at 4. Nadine met me at the door with a smile that never reached her eyes, took my coat without asking, and pointed me toward the far end of the table. Not the head. The other end, near the kitchen door where the draft came in and the chair wobbled. I sat down without saying a word. Nadine was 5 months pregnant. Glowing, the way people always say. And she really was. Confident. Dressed like she expected the evening to be photographed. She had planned every detail of that dinner, right down to the folded napkins and where each person sat. I know that now. I suspected it then. My son, Randall, 43 years old, sat beside her. He had the look of a man who had been agreeing with someone for too long. Not unhappy exactly, just worn down into a shape that no longer looked fully like him. Dinner moved along. Conversation happened around me more than with me. When I tried to say something about the pirates, Nadine redirected the table and everyone followed her lead. Randall kept his eyes on his plate. I kept my eyes on everything. Then, halfway through the meal, Nadine stood. She tapped her glass with a spoon. One clean note. The room fell quiet in the way it does when people expect to listen. "I just want to say something before dessert," she said. Her voice was calm, practiced. The voice of someone who had rehearsed the moment more than once. With the baby coming, Randall and I have been doing a lot of thinking. About responsibility, about structure, about making sure this family is protected going forward. She paused, looked around the table. Let the silence settle. "Starting today, I'll be managing the finances for this family. All of them. We've already taken the first steps." There were nods around the table. Someone said, "That makes sense. She's organized." Another said, "Good. Someone should be in charge." Then she looked at me. "James," she said, using my first name in that soft, careful tone people use when the decision has already been made and they want it to sound kind. "We took care of your accounts this morning. Your credit card has been canceled. At your age, you really shouldn't have to deal with all that stress. If you need anything, just ask Randall." Randall nodded. He did not look at me. Around the table, glasses lifted. A cousin said, "Smart move. Older people get taken advantage of all the time." Someone else added, "That's responsible planning." I looked down at my hands resting flat on the tablecloth. They were steady. I noticed that and held on to it. Then I set my glass down and stood slowly. My left knee has complained ever since a fall on a job site back in 2009. I stood straight anyway. I looked at my son. "Randall," I said, "you really don't know, do you?" His smile vanished. The room went quiet again. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes just before something changes direction, and everyone feels it before they understand it. To explain what happened next, I have to go back nearly 30 years. February 1995. Winter in Pittsburgh is a particular kind of cold. It rolls off the rivers, works its way into the buildings, and settles into your bones. Dorothy had been sick for 3 years. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind. She fought it without complaining, without making it the center of every room she entered. That was her way. Quiet stubbornness. I loved that about her from the beginning. She died on a Tuesday. Randall was 14. I was 38. I still remember the drive home from the hospital. Ice on the parkway. Cars moving slow. I passed an exit I had taken 100 times and did not recognize it for a second. My mind was running on something beyond thought at that point. Just enough to keep the car on the road. One exit at a time. I kept thinking the same thing over and over. Get home before Randall gets back from school. Get home. Get your face right. Figure out what to say. That was the only goal. If you want, I can continue rewriting the next part in the same style with James Burnett throughout. Not grief, not the future, just get home and still be standing when he walked through the door. But he was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a peanut butter sandwich in front of him. No jelly, the way he had always eaten it. He looked up at me and asked, "Is she gone?" I said yes. He nodded, took a bite of his sandwich, and looked back down. I sat across from him. Neither of us said much. Dorothy had been the one who made conversation easy. Without her, Randall and I were just two quiet people sitting in a house that had become too large and too still overnight. The bills started arriving the following week. Hospital costs, funeral expenses, a notice about the second mortgage. Dorothy and I had refinanced 3 years earlier to pay for her first round of treatment, and the payments did not stop just because she did. Then came a letter from the union hall saying my hours at the industrial plant were being reduced because of a contract restructure. 3 envelopes in 1 week. That Saturday night I sat at the kitchen table with all 3 spread out in front of me and a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I read them. Randall was asleep down the hall. The house was quiet. The furnace clicked on and off. Outside, the snow was falling slow and steady, the way it does in Pittsburgh in February, like it has nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. I sat there for a long while. Then I made a decision. The only real decision, I think, I ever made in my life. I was not going to fall apart. Not because I didn't have the right to. I had every right. But Randall needed someone upright, and I was the only one left for the job. So I picked up the letters, stacked them neatly, slipped them into a folder, and went to bed. One thing at a time. Starting tomorrow, I was an electrician, industrial work, load panels, 3-phase systems, the kind of wiring that keeps factories and warehouses alive. It wrecks your sleep. It hardens your hands. Some of the fumes are the kind you do not dwell on too long. But I was good at it. I understood how systems failed and how to make them reliable again. What I did not understand was money beyond a paycheck. That changed because of a man named Clyde Hutchins. About 6 months after Dorothy died, I picked up a Saturday job at a warehouse in Monroeville. A loading dock panel had shorted out and nobody wanted to touch it because the last electrician had done bad work and left behind something that looked dangerous. Yeah, it was dangerous. I fixed it in 4 hours, traced the fault back to a corroded junction box that should have been replaced years earlier, rewired the downstream connections, tested everything twice before I packed up my tools. Clyde owned the building. He was 63, retired from running logistics for a regional distribution company, and he watched me work the whole time without saying much. When I finished, he said, "You don't just fix the problem. You figure out what caused it." We stood in that parking lot and talked for 2 hours. Cold afternoon. Neither of us in any hurry to leave. Clyde told me about the first property he had ever bought, a storage building near Turtle Creek with a leaking roof and a drainage problem nobody wanted to deal with. He bought it cheap because of those 2 things. Fixed the roof himself over 4 weekends. Fixed the drainage over 2 more. then rented it to a machine parts supplier on a 2-year lease and used that income to help cover the loan on his second property. Then he repeated the process. He explained depreciation schedules, LLC structures, how to read a commercial lease from both sides of the table at once. He told me the best properties were not the pretty ones. They were the ones with solvable problems, the ones everyone else walked away from because they could not see a way through them. But if you could solve the problem, that was where the value lived. He did not offer me money. He did not offer me a partnership. He just talked. The way older men sometimes talk to younger ones when they see something in them worth not wasting. And I listened the way I had learned to listen on job sites, quietly, without reacting, just taking it in. That night I drove home and wrote down everything he had said on a legal pad, front and back. Small handwriting, every detail I could remember. 6 months later, I bought my first property, a narrow commercial unit in Swiss Vale, one of those Pittsburgh neighborhoods that used to be industrial and now just felt tired, like it was waiting for someone to decide whether it still mattered. The unit had been vacant for 14 months. The listing had expired twice. If you want, send the next part, and I'll continue it in the same style. The roof leaked in 2 places. The back door had warped in its frame and would not close properly. The previous tenant had left behind broken equipment, a ruined floor drain, and a smell that took 3 weeks of ventilation to clear. I paid $31,000 for the place. The loan came through a small credit union where the branch manager knew my work history and could verify my union wages. The terms were not ideal, but they were manageable if I got the right tenant at the right number, so I fixed it myself, nights after shifts, Saturdays. The occasional Sunday when Randall had something at school and the house was empty. I rewired the entire panel. I patched the roof over 2 cold weekends in March, working with shingles that turned brittle in the temperature and hands that stiffened after an hour outside. I fixed the drain. I painted the inside with a roller and a cheap tray from the hardware store. I repaired the back door frame with wood filler and 2 replacement hinges that cost me $8 total. Randall was 15 that year. Some Saturdays he came out to the unit and handed me tools without being asked. We would work a few hours without saying much. On the drive home, I would buy him a burger. That was about the shape of us in those years. Not distant, just quiet. 2 people who showed up for each other without needing to make speeches about it. 4 months after I bought the place, I rented it to a small auto parts distributor on a 2-year lease at $1,400 a month. That covered the loan payment and left me a little over $200 each month. I remember sitting on the concrete floor of that unit the night before the tenant moved in. Bare walls. One overhead light buzzing faintly. Cold air slipping through the repaired door frame. I sat there for 20 minutes without thinking much at all. Just sitting inside something I had built out of a problem nobody else wanted to solve. I thought about Dorothy. She would have called me stubborn. Then she would have told me to eat something and get some sleep. The second unit came 18 months later. Braddock. Another post-industrial neighborhood. Another building with problems that could be fixed. I bought it for $44,500. It had a drainage issue near the foundation, 2 broken windows, and an electrical system that needed upgrading. I rented that one to a contractor supply company at $1,800 a month. Then came the third, then the fourth. In 2008, I formed Burnett Industrial Holdings, LLC with the help of a Pittsburgh attorney named Floyd Mercer. A union colleague recommended him. He was methodical, not a man who wasted words. Floyd restructured my ownership, reviewed my leases, and told me to keep my personal finances completely separate from the company. So I did. By then, I owned 4 properties producing steady income. My name barely appeared in public records. I still worked union jobs, still drove the same truck, still wore the same clothes. Randall graduated college that year. He thought he had received a partial scholarship. The rest had been paid through a trust account he had never seen. He thanked me once for helping with groceries during exam week. I told him, You did the work. Which was true. The fifth property came in 2012, a commercial storage complex in eastern Ohio, not far from the Pennsylvania line. By then, the portfolio was valued at about $2.84 million. Net rental income averaged around $22,000 a month. I retired in 2017, mostly because my knee finally gave me a legitimate reason to stop. I never told Randall any of it. Not because I was ashamed, because I had watched what happened to men who grew up knowing money was waiting for them. It made them wait instead of build, expect instead of earn. I wanted Randall to work because he had to. I wanted him to make decisions because they mattered. I wanted him to become the kind of man who would have been fine either way. And he did become that man. At least until Nadine started quietly rewriting the story. I met Nadine for the first time at a cookout Randall hosted in the summer of 2014. She was 24, sharp, quick to laugh at exactly the right moments. She had the kind of social intelligence that looks like warmth until you have watched it long enough to understand what it really is. Reading the room, measuring people. Deciding who matters and who does not before introductions are even finished. She shook my hand, called me Mr. Burnett, and spent about 5 seconds scanning my living room before filing me away in whatever category she kept in her head. I recognized the move because it was something I did too. Only I did it with buildings instead of people. They married in 2016. I gave them a check that covered 3 months of mortgage payments, framed as a home repair fund. No strings, no conditions. The shift started maybe a year into the marriage. Subtle enough that I almost missed it. Randall called less often, not dramatically, just the difference between once a week and once every 2 weeks, then once a month. When I mentioned it, he said Nadine was tired, work was busy, life was full. All reasonable explanations. So I let it go. Then came what I eventually started thinking of as the concern offensive. Nadine began asking questions that sounded like care. Did I have a plan for the future? Was I managing all right on my own? Had I looked into financial planning for retirement? Were my accounts arranged properly in case something happened to me? Randall started asking versions of the same questions when we spoke. Slightly different words, but close enough to hers that after a while it no longer sounded like his own thinking. He started showing up at my house with printed articles about financial scams targeting retirees, all of them highlighted in yellow. He would set them on my kitchen table and say, "Nadine just worries about you, Dad. She reads a lot." That was when I began paying closer attention. Then came the visits that felt less like family check-ins and more like inspections. Nadine and Randall would stop by together, supposedly just to see how I was doing. She would glance at the mail on my counter, ask casual questions about my Medicare card. "Are you keeping up with everything?" It must be a lot to manage alone. One afternoon, she looked around the neighborhood and said, "Do you still feel safe here at night, James? Things have changed around here." I had lived in that house for 22 years. I knew every neighbor by name. Half of them I had helped at one point or another. A tripped breaker, a dead outlet, a furnace that refused to start in January. I said nothing. I kept watching. The next move came in September. Randall called and asked if I would consider signing a limited emergency authorization, just so he could help with banking if something ever happened. He said it casually, as if it were ordinary. I told him I would think about it. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my house with a document Nadine had apparently printed and partially filled out already. I looked it over, told him I would have my attorney review it, and slipped it into the kitchen drawer. That evening, after he left his phone on my counter while he went to the bathroom, I noticed Nadine's calls to him had stretched to nearly 90 minutes. I called Floyd Mercer the next morning. Not to act, not yet, just to make sure he understood the situation. Floyd listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "You want to wait or you want to move?" "Wait," I said. "Not yet." "All right," he said. "Tell me when." Then, one Tuesday morning in October, I was at a hardware store in Bethel Park buying a pressure fitting for the compressor in my garage. Small errand. 10 minutes, maybe. The cashier ran my card. Declined. She tried again. Same result. She handed it back without making a scene. I paid cash, thanked her, and drove home. From my kitchen, I called the bank. The representative explained that the account had been placed under restriction at the request of an authorized contact. That contact was Randall Burnett. He had submitted a form claiming concern about elder financial vulnerability. I stood there holding the phone for a moment. Then I set it down on the counter and looked out through the kitchen window at the backyard. The yard where Randall used to catch fireflies in July. The yard where I set up a sprinkler on hot afternoons when he was small. The yard where Dorothy used to sit on the back step in the evenings when the weather was good. Then I picked up the phone again and called Floyd. "It's time," I said. "I'll need 6 weeks," he said. "You've got them." Over the next 6 weeks, Floyd prepared a complete documentation package. Every property deed, current appraisals from 3 certified firms, all 5 lease agreements, 12 years of LLC financial statements, bound and tabbed. He also prepared a legal analysis confirming that the emergency authorization Randall had submitted was unenforceable against any asset held by Burnett Industrial Holdings, LLC, which had existed for years before Nadine ever entered the picture and sat entirely outside Randall's legal reach. Floyd's office also logged every access attempt made against my personal accounts during those 6 weeks. Dates, times, requested amounts, everything documented and time-stamped. During that period, I called Randall twice. Normal conversations. How was work? How was Nadine feeling? How was the nursery coming along? I said nothing about the account restrictions. Nothing about Floyd. I kept everything ordinary. I went to bed at a decent hour, fixed the compressor in my garage, watched the Pirates lose, which is not a difficult habit to develop, and I waited. So, back to that table. Nadine had just finished her announcement. My credit card was gone. My son had nodded along with it. The table had approved, and I had just stood up and asked Randall if he knew. The whole room was waiting. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and called Floyd. "You can come in now," I said. "Who is that?" Nadine asked. The warmth had vanished from her voice completely. "My attorney." Randall pushed back his chair. "Dad, what are you—" The front door opened. Floyd Mercer stepped inside wearing a dark jacket and carrying the same leather briefcase he had owned for as long as I had known him. Gray at the temples, reading glasses tucked into his breast pocket. He walked with the unhurried ease of a man who had been in enough rooms to know he did not need to impress anyone. "Good evening," he said. "I represent James Burnett." He set the briefcase down in the center of the dining table, right between the turkey platter and the cranberry dish and the matching plates Nadine had clearly chosen for the occasion, then opened it. Inside were folders, deeds, certified appraisals, 12 years of LLC financial statements, bound and tabbed. The room went completely still. No one was eating now. The football game in the other room suddenly sounded very far away. Floyd opened the first folder and spoke without drama. Just facts, delivered cleanly. James Burnett is the sole member of Burnett Industrial Holdings, LLC, formed in Pennsylvania in 2008. The company holds title to 5 commercial properties across Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. Their current combined appraised value is $2.84 million. Nadine gave a short, sharp laugh, the kind people use when they need a second to recover. "That's not possible." Floyd slid a document across the table toward Randall. "Monthly net rental income averages $22,000. All accounts are current. There is no outstanding debt on any of the 5 properties." Randall picked up the paper, set it down, picked it up again. His hands were not steady. Floyd placed a second document on the table. The emergency financial authorization signed by Randall Burnett in October does not extend to assets held by the LLC. It is unenforceable as written. All personal account restrictions have been reversed as of this morning." Then he laid down a third page, face up, so everyone at the table could see the heading. "All account access attempts made between October 14th and November 28th have been logged and documented by legal counsel. No criminal referral is being made at this time. That will remain the case provided there are no further unauthorized attempts to access or restrict Mr. Burnett's finances." Then Floyd closed the briefcase, straightened his jacket. "That concludes the summary." And just like that, he turned and walked back out the front door, as quiet leaving as he had been entering. The room stayed motionless for a long moment after that. No one looked at anyone else. Even the children in the hallway had gone silent without being told. Nadine was the first to speak. Her voice had changed. All the practiced warmth she had worn through the evening was gone. What was left underneath was not cruelty. It was fear, a very specific kind of fear, the kind that comes from growing up without enough and spending the rest of your life trying to make sure that never happens again. "You hid all of this," she said. "All these years. You watched us struggle and you sat on this." I looked at her steadily. "I never told you anything," I said. "That is not the same as hiding." "It is the same thing." "No," I said, "it isn't. You made decisions about my life without my knowledge or my consent. That is not the same thing as what I did." She had no answer for that. Randall looked up from the documents. His eyes were red. "Dad," he said, "why didn't you tell me? Any of it?" I sat back down in the unsteady chair at the drafty end of the table. "Because I wanted you to become who you were without my money making the choices for you," I said, "and you did. You became a man who works, a man who shows up, a man who handles things. I'm proud of that." I paused. "But somewhere in the last 2 years, you let someone convince you that I was a problem to be managed, and you used your name to take away my access to my own accounts." I looked directly at him. "That's what I can't let go of easily, Randall. Not the money. That." He had no answer. Neither did the room. Nadine stood, took her coat from the back of her chair, and said something I will not repeat. Then she walked to the door and left. It closed behind her with a sound that seemed to linger longer than it should have. After that, the family began to clear out quickly. Quiet apologies near the door. Cars backing out of the driveway one by one. Nadine's mother left without looking at me. The neighbor who had stayed for dinner slipped out somewhere in the middle of it all. When the house finally emptied, Randall stayed at the table with the documents spread out in front of him. I remained in my chair at the far end. The football game was still playing in the other room. No one had bothered to turn it off. We sat there for a while without speaking, and that was all right. We had always been better at sitting than talking. He stayed with me for 3 weeks after that. He slept in his old room, the same narrow bed, the same window looking out over the backyard. He went to work every day, came home, and sat at my kitchen table. Some nights we watched the game. Some nights we just sat. We talked more during those 3 weeks than we had in the previous 3 years. Some of it was about Nadine, how gradually the shift had happened, how he had not seen it building while he was inside it. Some of it was about Dorothy, things he had never known because he had been 14 when she died, and there are questions a 14-year-old does not think to ask. Some of it was just ordinary life, a problem he had been carrying at work, the compressor in my garage. The Pirates, which neither of us had much faith in anymore. One evening he started to apologize, and I told him to stop. I did not want the apology. I wanted him to understand clearly enough that if something like this ever came at him again from another direction, he would recognize it before it settled in too deep. He listened the way he used to when he was young, and I was showing him how something worked. That was enough for me. He hired his own attorney. He worked through the separation one step at a time. The house, the shared finances, what responsibility for the baby would look like going forward. He did not run from any of it. My grandson was born the following April. His name is Theodore, Teddy. He has Dorothy's coloring, which still catches me off guard sometimes when the light hits him a certain way. I held him in that hospital room, and everything else went quiet. He was just a child who needed the people around him to be honest with each other. That was the job now. The same week he came home, I set up a trust for him. Floyd drew it up clean. No access before 25, distributions tied to education, then a first property, then a reserve fund after that. When Teddy is old enough, I will sit down with him and explain exactly where it all came from. Every property, every night I worked after he was asleep, every decision made one step at a time. I also helped Nadine clear one of her larger debt accounts, but only on the condition that she complete a structured financial counseling program and maintain a monthly budget reviewed by a neutral third party for 2 full years. It was not charity, and it was not punishment. It was a foundation. The same kind Clyde Hutchins gave me. Knowledge and structure, not a handout. Some people in the family thought I was being too easy on her. I was not being easy. I was being precise about what actually helps and what only feels satisfying for a moment. These days, I still drive the F-150. I still wear the gray flannel shirt. Last spring, I finally fixed the garage compressor. A $14 part, 45 minutes of work. Randall sat on a bucket the whole time and asked questions. That was a good afternoon. I'm telling this story because I think there are a lot of men my age sitting at the ends of tables, being managed, being handled, being spoken about in the third person while they are still in the room. Most of them have more beneath them than anyone realizes, and the silence they have kept, the same silence that built everything, gets mistaken for emptiness. It is not emptiness. It never was. So let me say 5 things. One man to another. First, quiet is a strategy, not a weakness. But it only works if you are the one choosing it. Second, structure your assets before someone else decides to do it for you. An LLC is not only for corporations. A trust is not only for wealthy families. Get yourself a Floyd. Third, your children need to see you stand up. Not for the money, for the principle that a man should not be made invisible inside his own life. Fourth, people who move only on what they think they can take will always show you who they are, if you wait long enough. And fifth, real patience is not waiting because you have no choice. It is waiting because you know exactly what you are waiting for. I knew, and when the moment came, I was ready. Because here is what Nadine never understood, and what a lot of people never understand about quiet men. The ones who say the least have usually been paying attention the longest. And when a man who has been paying attention for 28 years finally decides to speak, he does not need to raise his voice.